Hi everybody, this is Mr. Mittner, and welcome back to another screencast, and this week's is going to be on force. If you look here, Yoda is my buddy, and Yoda talks about force all the time, and if it wasn't so early and I didn't have this throat issue, I would probably do my best Yoda impersonation, but you'll just have to wait to hear that in class. But a force is defined as a push, like this girl here, or a pull, like these dogs. It's a push or a pull that causes a change in acceleration, a change in velocity, causes an acceleration, which is a change in velocity. Now remember, velocity has both a rate, a value, and a direction. So if I change either the direction or the value of that velocity, I have acceleration. If there's force, there's acceleration. If there's acceleration, there was a force to cause it. If there's not, then there's no force. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. We're going to first talk about balanced versus unbalanced forces. All right. In this case, these two guys are pushing on the car together at the same time. And if this guy's pushing with the equal force that this guy's pushing, even though there's force in both directions, it is a balanced force. There is no net force. The car doesn't go anywhere. Okay, force has to cause an acceleration or a change in velocity. If that car doesn't move, if it doesn't change its velocity, there's no force. Okay, whereas down here we have cars and they're not pushing in opposite directions, and so this car hits and this car's going this way and this car hits it this way, so there may be a net force in, say, this direction, an unbalanced force causing a force in this direction with a certain a value, a rate, and that change in acceleration. So that would be an unbalanced force. I like to throw the skydiving example in here because there's a misconception out there that if you have a balanced force that there's no movement, and an unbalanced force causes movement. That's not necessarily true. These skydivers here start off with an unbalanced force where they're accelerating downward at a rate of 9.8 meters per second, or 32 feet per second every second. And so they're falling at that rate. And eventually, gravity's pulling them down. But at the same time gravity's pulling them down, there's air pressure pushing back up, as you can see by this guy's cheeks here. The air pressure is pushing up on them. Eventually, the air pressure will equal the gravitational pressure. They'll keep falling, but they'll stop accelerating. They'll reach something called terminal velocity. And at terminal velocity, they're no longer accelerating. So there's no more force, a net force. The force is now balanced. Okay, another way to say unbalanced force is there's a net force. There's no net force. The force is balanced, even though they continue to fall. They're just not accelerating. So you can have movement and still have a balanced force. Okay, going on to the next slide. Newton's first law of motion. All of Newton's laws were dealing with force. Here's Isaac Newton, good-looking fella. And Newton's first law, we did lots and lots of activities in class about this. If you remember, we did the egg, where you hit the pan. The egg is a balanced force right now of gravity pushing down and this pushing up. When I move the pan, I remove the balance and gravity pulls it down. So it stays in Newton's first law, as an object stays at rest unless an outside force moves it. It's at rest here until gravity moves it down. Same with this. It's at rest until you flick that card and the coin falls in the glass. We did examples of that. I want to point out that not everything, the word for this is inertia. Newton's first law is about inertia. If things have an inertia, it's an ability to resist change. It's either staying at rest unless a force acts on it to move it, or staying moving unless an outside force acts on it to stop it. But not everything has the same amount of inertia. The more mass you have, the more inertia you have. So it's a lot easier to move this fella than it is this guy right here. He's got more inertia. So if these guys square off, he's not going to move very easily, and he will. Okay, so an object at rest remains at rest, or an object in motion remains in motion, unless an outside force acts on it. That's called inertia. The more mass you have, the more inertia you have. On to Newton's second law. Newton's second law is all about that acceleration part I was telling you about. If things are falling due to gravity, excuse me, Here we have a vacuum chamber, and we're dropping a pool cue or a pool ball. And here we have feathers, and because we've taken the air resistance out, they're both accelerating due to gravity at the same rate. This is after every second you see it falling a little bit further. That's because it's speeding up. It's accelerating due to gravity. Okay, so that's acceleration. Force equals mass times acceleration. May the force be with you. May the mass times acceleration be with you. All right. Another way to rewrite that is acceleration is what we're really looking for, is force over mass. So what that means is if the numerator goes up while the denominator stays the same, if the mass hasn't changed, if I move that with more force, I accelerate it by that same value. So if I double the force, I double the acceleration. Force and acceleration are directly proportional. However, the mass is in the denominator, and force doesn't change, and mass changes. If mass goes up, if the denominator goes up, the acceleration goes down. If mass goes down, the acceleration goes up. These are called inversely proportional. So I've got these two balls here, and if I push this ball with the same force as I push this ball, the smaller ball with less mass will accelerate at a greater rate because it has less mass. It goes back to the inertia. The laws are all interchangeable. This has more inertia than this, so this will not accelerate quite as quickly as this. Going on to Newton's third law. Newton's third law says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I had the pleasure of seeing a space shuttle launch in the past when I was vacationing in Florida. And so the action is all of this rocket fuel pushing down, burning, just tons and tons and tons of it. It's so bright. It was so much incredible force that no viewer, no person, not even the media, could be within a mile of the launch when it happened. You had to be a mile away, and you're using binoculars or zoom in on your cameras, but this force was so incredible that you had to be pretty far away. So the action is this pushing down, and the reaction is it pushes the space shuttle towards space. Anybody that's ever shot a gun before, a rifle or a shotgun, realizes that the same thing holds true. There's the action, and the reaction is the kick backwards. There's an old story about a guy who was convicted, and he was going to go to a firing squad. And they asked him if he had any last words, and he said, yes, I deserve this. I think you should shoot me, but I don't think you should shoot me with one of those guns. I think you should find the biggest gun. I think you should create a new gun with the biggest bullets you could possibly have that will just annihilate me in one shot. Just destroy me with these great big giant bullets, this great big giant gun. And so the story goes as they did. They created this thing because they wanted to just blow him away, because he taunted them about how much he deserved it and how their wimpy guns wasn't going to do justice to the way he had tortured their people. So they put this great big gun, and when the guy shot it, it not only killed him, but it killed the guy that it shot, because the reaction was equally as strong and blew the guy's arm and chest right off of his body. Kind of a gross story, but it goes to the action-reaction. For every action, the reaction is equal and opposite. Okay, last slide that I have anything is contact versus non-contact forces. When we talk about forces, we have to talk about what type they are. If you're in contact with something like friction, where this polar bear sliding on ice, it has friction, but not as much as, say, this friction. There's less friction, so it moves more easily, but there's friction. Here the friction is rubbing on something enough, making enough heat that will create fire. Those are contact forces. Friction is a contact force. Anything where something is in contact with something else is a contact force. However, a non-contact force, you don't actually have to touch. This guy's finger doesn't actually touch the doorknob, but he definitely feels the force here. Okay, gravity is another non-contact force. You can move magnets without actually touching them with other magnets. That's a non-contact force. Okay, so there are forces where you touch, and there are forces where you don't touch. If I'm in a pool and I'm floating, the water's pushing me up, that's buoyancy. That's a contact force because I'm touching the water. So just to know the difference there is good. Lastly, I am going to review something here. If I have a graph, and if I go back to, and again, my drawings are not so good on here. If this is position, and this is time, like we've done in the previous video. And if I'm going like this, that's a constant velocity. And if I change here, the flat line would be I am at rest because time is going, but my position is not changing over time, so I am not moving. And then I go up, and then let's say I go down. All right, what I want you to understand is, if we go back to this graph, that anytime there's a change in velocity, that's acceleration. So I go here and I stop, I've changed velocity there. Okay, so there's acceleration here. There's a force acting on it here. I change again here, there's a force there. I change here, there's a force there. Okay, this is going in a positive direction, stop, going in a positive direction. Here I start coming back. Let's say this is 0, this is 5, this is 10. I went from 0 to 5 to 10, and here I go from 10 back towards 0. I'm going back to where I started from, because vectors have to do with both quantity and direction. Okay, so this is very, very important that you can look at a graph and realize where forces are applied, because there's acceleration. This is positive acceleration. I'm going in a positive direction. This is negative acceleration. Okay, where I go here, my velocity is the same. Wait, if I change the graph here, I change the graph and I go with, instead of position versus time, velocity versus time. Now the straight line means constant acceleration, not constant velocity, because it's velocity over time, the slope. The steeper the slope, just like in the steeper the slope before, it would be greater velocity. In this case, it's greater acceleration. Okay, so if I this is more acceleration than this. Okay, this is positive acceleration because my velocity is going up. If I have a line that goes like this instead, where I go from up here and I'm going down, I'm actually going, say here, I'm actually lowering my velocity over time, so that's negative acceleration. So positive acceleration, negative acceleration. Sometimes negative acceleration is called deceleration, but scientifically we're just talking about, remember, vectors have a direction. Positive is in the positive direction, negative is in the opposite direction. I hope this makes sense. I hope that you've enjoyed the screencast. We will continue to work on this in class. We've done lots and lots of labs, and our common assessment is this Friday. I hope that we all do well. And I love starting out the year with force, because we will continue in everything we do to talk about force, so at the end of the year this will still be fresh to you and you will knock it out of the park. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in class. Have a good day.